Welcome, Traceable Designers. Today we're making a super easy cornice style Lambrequin valance. This is the arch design style. We're using a pillowcase that has an abstract print, so we're going to be focusing on where to position the design form so that we can have some continuity between the print on both the left and right side panels. You also have to keep in mind that you will need extra room above the design form, approximately 4 inches, for making your rod hanging pocket. I'm using 2 king-size pillowcases to make my Lambrequin valance. So I'm deconstructing by cutting around the edges. So I have a seam around all 4 edges for mine. These are all 36 inches wide, one's cut out. So I have 4 separate pieces of fabric to start to find the best placement for my left and right side panels. So with this abstract pillowcase fabric, I don't have an exact repeat match, so I can't make 2 identical side panels. So I'm choosing one of the symbols, the small flower, that is positioned or can be positioned on the upper side of each of the left and right side panels. So I'm using that as an anchor, and then I'm positioning my design form for my left and right side panels to make sure that that's going to fall somewhere in the upper section of the side panel. So that will determine my left and right design form placement for my left and right side panels. I'm starting with my right side panel, so the fabric is upside down with the back side facing up, and you're positioning your design form with the printed side facing up. So we're cutting sections of fusible backing. This is going to hold the lining to the fabric. And because I have a jagged edge here and I'm going to be tracing straight down the side, I'm going to need heat and bond underneath the area where I'm tracing. In other words, as close to the edge as possible. So you'll position your first piece of fusible backing on the upper section. Make sure it comes edge to edge across all the area where the design form will be placed. Fuse that down using a dry iron with no steam. The upper section will straighten out when you trace for the rod pocket. So now reposition your design form, make sure everything's covered, and we need a second section obviously here to finish covering the fabric. So you'll cut a second piece of fusible backing, again get it as close to the edges as possible, and make sure that it is covering the entire area of fabric that will be covered by the design form for tracing. You need to make sure that your lining is completely fused underneath where you will be tracing. Once the paper has completely cooled, you'll be able to peel it off to expose the glue. Peel that off in sections. Make sure that you don't pull the glue off when you're removing the paper. Then you're going to cut a piece of lining that extends past all the edges, and you'll line that up across the top edge of the glue. That is going to be below the section where your rod pocket will be. So you're going to put the lining across the top of the glue, and starting in the center with a sweeping motion out toward the sides, you're just going to fuse that lining to the back of your fabric section. So if you turn it toward you, you can get a good look at making sure that it is straight across the top, then move from the center down and out toward the sides until you've completely fused your lining to the back of your fabric section. So since this is long, it might be easier for you to pull it to the front over the ironing board, start on top, and then just continue to move the piece of fabric over the ironing board until you get all the way down to the bottom of the fabric. When you're working with a pillowcase, your maximum width is going to be about 19 inches. So you have to make sure that your upper section of your design form fits within that 19-inch area. And make sure that if you're adding any depth, you do that first before you do any other tracing. So you will slide your design form down from the upper edge of the rod pocket section to add your depth. So in order to make sure everything is nice and straight, you will align the top edge of your design form along the lining, and then you're going to trace down the side to give you your straight line so you have your positioning in place. If you were planning to add length to your design form, you want to make sure that you have predetermined that before you begin. And of course, if you were adding depth, you would trace that first before you lower your design form to add your length. So in my case, I'm planning to start on the left side here with tracing down the side to make sure that that is nice and straight. So just follow along the design form, make sure it stays straight across the top edge of the lining. Then after you trace the straight edge, we start underneath. So I'm beginning at my width marker and I'm tracing the lower curved section on the upper part of the design form. Make sure you trace around the design area, stopping at the length extension area if you are adding length. In this case, I am. So that is a straight area where you can trace and then lower the design form. So I'm just lowering down to my desired length, and then I'm going to finish tracing the lower design end, and then of course you can connect the line between the length area. Now to mark my width, I am marking the width line top and bottom and then sliding the design form left so that I can trace across the edge to connect my marks. This will show me the cut line for my panel width. To mark your rod pocket section, you'll just realign your design form with the arrow marker at the top edge of the lining and make sure it's nice and straight on the side, and then you simply trace up the side and across the top edge of the design form to mark your rod pocket cut line. This will straighten out your top section of your fabric if it is uneven. Once you've finished your tracing, then you'll just carefully follow the trace line to cut out your valance side panel. You want to make sure you take your time around the curved edges to make sure they're nice and smooth, and then make sure you do cut up across the top section and across the rod pocket area to make sure that's nice and straight. Then once you've finished cutting out your side panel, make sure you run an iron across the front. You want to make sure you get rid of any buckles or anything that's not completely fused down. So just carefully run your iron over before you move on to your rod pocket. So to make your rod pocket, you're going to fold over the fabric to meet the top edge of the lining. Then we're going to cut sections of fusible backing to fit inside of that folded area, making sure we don't overlap onto the ironing board. And then once that has completely cooled, just peel the paper back to reveal the glue. Then you'll pull your pocket taut over and then just fuse that down. That'll be a little longer for the fuse because you're going through a few sections of fabric. Then just trim off any uneven edges. So now that we have our right side panel finished, we're going to try to come close to matching up our left side. So this anchor that I have for this flower, I'm going to try to position my design form on the opposite side so that it somewhat matches the right side panel. So since I identified the flower on one of my sections, I will be using that section. So of course we have to account for the rod hanging pocket above. Also for the added length that I'm using on my side panels. So we have to take that into consideration when we're positioning our heat and bond. So I'm lining it up with the design form right side up on top of the front side of the fabric, but of course when we attach the lining to the back, it will be the back side. So then we have to flip the design form over and use it upside down in order to make the left side panel. To make your left side panel, you'll follow the same process as the right side panel, making sure that everything is reversed, and you need to have the area above the unlined section for your rod pocket. I'm measuring down for the 32-inch length and marking off my design form for my proper placement for my heat and bond. Of course, we add it as we did before, all the way to the edge and all the way down to the bottom with an overlapping piece of backing. And then we want to make sure we have the coverage below the length of the second panel. So once you fuse that down and then add your lining, you'll measure from the top of your lining down to the full length of the panel so it matches the other side panel. Then you position your design form again reversed, upside down with the printed side facing down along the top edge of the lining, and then trace the straight edge, the wall side of the panel all the way down to the bottom. Then we'll move to the under section, the curved area, and we're going to trace underneath over to our width marker. And then we'll place a little mark there so we know where to adjust our panel width, and then continue around the curved edge, down the straight section, and then we're going to lower the design form to the length marker. Then we just finish tracing the outside and then underneath up to the straightening edge, and then just connect those lines so that you've got a complete cut line. Then just finish tracing off your width marker and mark and to straighten your rod pocket section. Then of course follow the cut line to cut out your left side panel. You can see that the print is basically balanced on both sides, and then hang those panels to make certain that your width is the way you like it before you move on to doing your trim. If you need to remove any width, remove it from the outside straight edge. Then we can move on to adding our trim. You can use the iron-on method or just use tube glue or a glue gun. When you are attaching your trim, make sure you have very pronounced curves for a really professional finish. And then when you get to the straight side of your panel, what you're going to do is cut the trim flush at the end of the curve, and then you're going to use the glue or attach the trim down the straight side, and then you'll just fold that underneath to secure that so you can't see the edge of the trim when it's against the wall. Okay, now that your side panels have been created, we're going to create a connector panel. You do have several choices in your kit, and you want to make sure your connector does overlap by at least 2 inches. So for sizing, first you determine which style you'd like, the traditional arched, or you can use the short arched connector and make that as wide as you'd like, or you can use the scalloped center connector. So I'm using the short arch connector, and I'm going to try to capture this flower so that I have a nice balance on my connector between my 2 side panels. Now you will be adding height to this connector so it can fold over and secure behind the rod. So to cover the space between my side panels, I'm going to make a 16-inch wide connector, which is considerably wider than the connector panel design form, so we're going to have to make some creative adjustments. So use the folded section to size your fabric, so you will make sure that you've positioned your design properly in the middle. Remember, you're using that arrow to raise and give yourself a little extra length to this piece because it's going to fold over the rod and secure with the Velcro fasteners. So when you are attaching your fusible backing, make sure you've captured any print that you'd like to center, and make sure that your heat and bond does not extend over the edges onto your ironing board. Then once you've fused that down, you'll be removing the paper again and adding lining to the back of this fabric section. Your lining should cover the entire fabric section and extend past all of the edges. Make sure that you have at least 1 inch extension beyond the edges so that you can cover all of the glue. Once that's secured, flip that over and make sure you iron to flatten out any creases that could be on the front side of your connector panel fabric. So for my width adjustment, I'm measuring over to the 8-inch mark, which is exactly the half size of my connector where I will be tracing. So I'm marking that. And remember, I'm trying to capture this flower. So because I'm adding an adjustment to this connector panel, it's going to dip down below where I'm positioning. So I'm marking the bottom where I'd like to finish against the fold. So I have to raise this short arched connector up for tracing, and then I'm going to have to extend my curve in order to make that nice and even. Align the design form along your marks, your width marks, and then trace the right side, and then down across the curved lower section, and then stop. When you're adding width to a curved panel, it has to have a straight finish at the fold. So I'm pulling out the scalloped connector and then I'm completing my curve along the bottom. So that's perfectly straight at the lower edge at the fold so that it won't have an indent when it's cut out. If your kit does not include the scalloped connector, you can use the lower edge, curved edge of the side panel design form. After you finish tracing the design end, then you'll use the arrow to raise the form so that you can finish tracing the height, adding height to this panel, trace around the design form to finish the entire shape. Then just follow the trace line to cut out your panel. Then you'll want to flip that over to the front side and then just iron to flatten any potential buckles or creases to make that perfectly smooth. Then just add your edge trim and we'll move on to adding the fasteners. Your kit includes a package of Velcro for making your fasteners, so pull that out. Then you'll need to fold the connector panel over your panels and then measure to determine the proper placement for your fasteners. Now you're going to position one on the lower edge and then you're going to do one on the top edge of the panel. So when that folds over, those will connect. So you'll use either the hard or soft side Velcro on the lower section and then the opposite on the upper section. So you can't just stick your Velcro, even though it is sticky back, right on your connector panel because it will not hold. So you have to use sections of fusible backing to deposit the glue first peel off the paper, and then the sticky back Velcro will secure really well to the back of the fabric section. So find your shiny section for the glue and then just position your fastener over top. Use the opposite side on the upper section, and then when that folds over, that will fasten between your two center panels. And you're ready to hang your beautiful new Lambrequin valance. Thank you for joining me, Traceable Designers, and remember, you can always make your mark with Traceable Designer.